everybody, and welcome to CLCI Live.
Hello.
Jen is with us again.
Hooray.
She was no longer with us, and now she is back with us.
Oh, you didn't see. You don't. She doesn't know.
Oh
what
yeah,
we did
she
while
doesn't.
was
She
gone.
didn't. Clearly, she didn't watch.
What happened? No, I was like dead that day.
See, there you go. I was making
That's
it
what
sound
he
like
said.
she passed away.
We
It
were
was
like-
being said
we were
that
like,
Jen is no
Jen
longer
is
with
no
us.
longer with us.
Which,
Sadly.
Oh my God.
Which she wasn't, and in her own words, it felt like she was dead, and now she's back and not dead. A new and improved Jen.
Almost. She's still got a little linger.
A new and improving Jen.
That's probably accurate.
Oh, and her face. No, never mind. I thought her face was stuck for a second. Okay. Before we begin, her screen keeps freezing.
Oh
Not for
no.
me.
It's just little tiny freezes, but you make the funniest faces when you're frozen.
Oh God,
see.
kill me.
Oh, you just came back. You can't lose you again. Before we begin, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Interact with us. Ask us questions. Get us off topic. We love the interaction. Last week, we talked about Clients 101, how to coach an indecisive client. Now we're looking at, not impulsive clients. What?
Overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed clients. I was looking at too far back. Overwhelmed clients is what we're doing today. So, what is being overwhelmed? Have we ever felt overwhelmed before? Are we feeling overwhelmed at the moment? Am I overwhelming you with too many questions?
You're
Yes.
working your way there.
Yes,
Which one would you
are.
like us to answer first? There was just
Any of them.
See, this is the problem. You can't question stack.
I can.
Then
You heard my questions,
but we don't know what to answer, so it keeps
You
us
don't know
quiet.
which to answer. So pick one. You pick
You
one.
know which ones to answer.
Oh, Anthony Lopez. How about what is
Is
overwhelmed?
being overwhelmed?
There. What is being whelmed? Can one be whelmed?
Yeah. When you get just enough that you can take, that's whelmed.
I'm not sure I have ever looked that word up or actually used whelmed, but I
I
think
don't know if it is an actual word, but it must be, right?
It has to be because over is the prefix.
it says engulf, submerge, or bury.
Versus
over buried.
submerged and over buried.
How interesting.
I think if you're whelmed, you overcome it. You're fine. You got a lot on your plate, but you're managing it well. You might be a little stressed, but you're able to compensate and you're able to cope. And it's not getting the better of you. That's what whelmed is to me.
I think I still use overwhelmed in that space versus whelmed.
Overwhelmed is like, now it's too much.
Yeah.
There's something wrong now. It's a problem. You're not coping. You're not managing.
Yeah.
Jen's gone again. You're just
She will be
overwhelmed.
missed. She will be missed.
So try and come back if you will.
But there is underwhelmed though.
You can be underwhelmed.
That is a word. Like if I was anticipating something great and I'm just kind of underwhelmed.
I'm bored.
A little bored, a little disappointed.
Yeah, that parade we were supposed to see this weekend, Lisa, I think was a little underwhelming for sure.
But we still have fun.
That's
Yes.
another
So
interesting.
I would say whelmed.
Yeah. Not with the parade, with the entire event itself, I was whelmed. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the parade underwhelmed.
Yeah. For context, everybody, I was supposed to go see a parade that I had no idea was going to last 4 minutes. Ended up lasting 4 minutes, which was underwhelming for Mardi Gras this last weekend. So
4 minutes is a very short parade.
yeah, I got there kind of late, expecting to catch some of it, and it was done in 4 minutes, apparently, according to my family. So yeah.
And I said the one we went to in Manitou Springs, Colorado, was probably about the same length, except they had a hill to climb, which slowed the whole procession down quite a bit.
So being overwhelmed, I think emotion is involved in this. What are your thoughts?
I think there's a lot of things going on at the same time. Emotions. I think in the moment I don't know what my emotions are. I don't, necessarily know what my decision is. I don't. I'm uncertain about things. Probably, I would imagine my pulse is racing. So there's probably a lot going on when I'm really in depth of that overwhelmed versus whelmed, as Anthony described.
I think overwhelmed also has a non-emotional connotation. Like you could say something like, "Oh, our system was overwhelmed. There was too many." Everyone's disappearing from life.
I know they're bouncing around.
You could say something like, "Our website was overwhelmed by too many requests and too many visitors, and then our site crashed. It was overwhelmed by the amount of requests." Or the dam was overwhelmed by so much water that it burst and killed the village beneath it.
Oh my gosh.
Non-emotional uses of overwhelmed, but when we're talking about people, we have an emotional reaction to being overwhelmed.
Yeah, can we talk about the end result in both of those examples you just gave?
Something
the website
being destroyed,
crashed. The dam broke.
No, those are all scary.
which is could be used as an emotional metaphor. The dam just breaks, and then you start crying.
Emotionally flooding.
Yes, emotionally flooding. Jen, it's very loud now.
Yes, we can really hear you.
It's overwhelming my speakers.
Oh, no.
Headphones.
They're going to break.
My eardrums are going to burst.
So I mean, what does that imply right there, right? When we get overwhelmed, what happens?
Something inside us breaks permanently.
I think for me, though, overwhelm is like a blanket term for a lot of different thoughts and emotions that are kind of swirled up into one
Yeah.
mess that I haven't been able to distinguish any of the intricacies, any of the details, any of the distinctions. And so it's just kind of showing up as overwhelm.
Feels like confusion is a part of that. Is I'm hearing like there is a sense of like confusion or lack of clarity.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As you were saying that, like wrapped up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, yeah, you're fine. As you're saying, like wrapped up and swirling, like I pictured like almost like a for me it was like a color cartoon tornado.
Yeah.
Like kind of
Tasmanian
all the
devil.
things into it.
Yeah.
And you've got to find a way to sort of calm that down and sort through.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to maybe equate it to like an overstimulation of the senses? That's kind of what I think of when I hear that word.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
You can only take so much sensory input before you start freaking out.
Yeah, sensory overload, essentially. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Emotional overload. And
I found all the sensory things at Disney to be very overwhelming.
Too many children, too many people.
Yes, it was just a lot.
Too many germs that overwhelmed your immune system and made
too many germs overwhelm my immune system. Yes.
There we go. So lots of things can be overwhelmed. So can clients when we're coaching. They can come into the session very overwhelmed with what is going on in their lives.
Let's talk about, before we even get to overwhelm within the session, if we have a client that is already overwhelmed, let's say they're not even our client yet, right? They're people, someone who is just experiencing overwhelm. Something in me says it's going to be hard for them to find a life coach in that. What are your thoughts? Am I wrong?
And what do you mean? I'm not following.
Well, I mean, if I'm already overwhelmed, is it too much to add in this other piece of finding a life coach, figuring it out, hiring somebody, etc.?
Maybe.
Possibly.
Possibly.
I think it could be, but I think also a lot of the times we typically can compartmentalize things, and that's a different process and evaluation than the flooding or overwhelmed feeling that we are. So it's possible, but it's also, do we make the best decisions when we're in that state, even though they're two different events?
I'm of the mind that a potential client feeling overwhelmed is a good way to precipitate coaching and to make it happen. That's like probably one of the more cliche, like coaching elevator pitches, like feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Try life coaching.
Well, so
it's like a major pain point that leads to coaching.
I agree. I mean, I think that somebody who's overwhelmed can very much benefit from coaching. But I see, and I'm sort of baiting you guys here. I see like hurdles that could quickly get in the way of somebody who's overwhelmed and knows they need help, right? How it could quickly become too much to add in this other piece, or so I guess what I'm my next question, and I want us to return to something Jen said too. I'll ask the next question, but then I want to circle back, or Lisa said about how you can compartmentalize it. So because I would like to discuss whether I think there are different kinds of overwhelm. There's like you can have a very specific area where you're overwhelmed, and then you can have like full overwhelm, right? Where just everything is too much and I can't function or compartmentalize. And that's usually the one that's a little scarier, more like something bad might happen. But it's okay. I mean, there are instances where we're overwhelmed in maybe one area or a few areas, but it's not so overwhelming we can't take life. What is something a coach can do to help like that client hire them when they're already in a state of overwhelm?
I mean, I would say meet them where they are and don't try to change them. Just be with them in that overwhelm and let them feel safe to be seen in that overwhelm is my first thought.
Brooke, did you mean like prior to coaching or in the coaching session?
I mean, prior to coaching, how can you essentially remove friction, remove stickiness, make, if I'm somebody who's specifically coaching overwhelmed clients who are experiencing overwhelm, what are ways that I can set up my system to get those people in the door? What are little things? What are little extras, as it were, that I can do? Or maybe not extras, but just something in my process possibly that will make it easier for the client that is overwhelmed.
I think showcase some of the skills that we do, specifically the way we listen in a different way than the average Joe typically listens, and utilize those perspectives with the client. I usually didn't have to spend a whole lot of time in the beginning. It just, used bits and pieces of who I am in the coaching session, and that usually drew them in. So I would say small bits and pieces of what we do in coaching, just to give them a sample, an experiment to see if that's something they were comfortable with.
Something, I mean, as you're sharing, but something that came up for me, and this would be like to do the research for them, and like host that on your website, right? So like in some way, so they don't have to get out there and figure out what coaching is, what therapy is, how it's gonna, have that on, so they're not having to do the research and figure that out and have all these extra steps. Host that on your website, have a piece of information there that's going to, now they don't have to go out and research. I think in that case, the more that you're able to get information to that person so that it's all in one spot and they don't have to go hunting, I think that in this particular instance becomes very, very important, because the less steps they have to take, the better. The less steps they have to take, the better. Streamline whatever process it is to get to you again. Very important, I think, with a client who is overwhelmed. Don't want to have some bunch of complicated steps in order to hire you. for a client who's already overwhelmed. Simplicity, I think, is the key for a coach who is going to be coaching clients with overwhelm. Simplicity and transparency. And I think the more information, the better, honestly, that you have on your site, like that is there, presented simply.
Yeah.
So that was just a thought I had before we even get into the coaching space of the overwhelmed client. If you think of anything else or anything else comes forward for how to help somebody who's coaching an overwhelmed client become a client, or get more clients, share that. Yeah.
Perhaps you also like maybe advertise your coaching session in a way that it's like, it's not something to add to your already busy plate. It's something to like clear your plate entirely. It's something to release pressure, not an extra thing to build more pressure. If the client is feeling overwhelmed, because otherwise it'll just feel like another obligation that they have to meet with so many other obligations. So how you word what your benefits are is very important too. Not just your value or the little bells and whistles, but what they're actually wanting to get as a change after coaching with you. How do they want this situation to be different than what it currently is? So what are some other ways that clients may indicate that they're overwhelmed or say that they're overwhelmed without saying it?
Once they're in the coaching seat?
Maybe before coaching. It could be before or during, but I'm still talking in that marketing place where maybe a client won't say that they're overwhelmed, but they might feel like, they're juggling. They have a lot of responsibilities.
Can't make a decision.
I need clarity.
I need clarity. What else?
They've got a lot of ideas, but they're not taking any action on any of it.
Mm-hmm.
If there's somebody who's racing in their speech or conversation with them, that's a very head-centric in the head, and is bringing up 50 different things, jumping from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing. That could be overwhelm. It could also be avoidance, but it could also be overwhelm. Yeah. If they're just, sobbing uncontrollably in front of you.
Stop crying, not a problem. Uncontrollably, that might be an indication of something a little more traumatic.
Well, a big part of, I think of one of the last times I was overwhelmed, and I was like very overwhelmed, was when we were moving.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just a very overwhelming situation. There's a lot going on, and I just kept feeling all of this, and it's like this, just a lot. It just feels like a lot going on, right? And in every situation, it doesn't go away. You don't get really a relief from it until it's done and you've moved and everything's handled. And I remember there was a point where I couldn't find my passport. And it was like this pinnacle moment of I am so stressed, I'm going on and I've lost my passport. And passport's so important because I love to travel. And mind you, I'd probably have enough time to get another passport. But in that moment, panic ensued. And then Anthony was trying to be so helpful. And then I just was and it just was like a pressure valve almost. And then of course I felt very bad and silly afterwards.
She's the one who wanted to move in the first place, mind you.
Yeah, no, but I just felt bad and silly.
You asked for it.
For my reaction.
The last time that I remember that feeling, I had no zippity-doo-dah reason for it. I was in yoga, was with a newer yoga teacher I hadn't been with. And we were at the end, we were doing essentially meditation. And all of a sudden she came over and touched my shoulders. And I'm feeling it again right now. And I just wanted to bawl my eyes out. And I'm like, I have absolutely no idea why. And I felt overwhelmed in that moment, because I was in the room with other people. I didn't want to interrupt their energy, nor did I want them to notice mine. And it was just complete overwhelmed feeling in that moment. And then the confusion of why is this happening was really crazy.
Yeah. Yoga is very stressful like that sometimes.
Well, it was for me that day at the end, but
I think sometimes working out can that can happen. I think because like when your body is is physically tired, it's easy to access emotion a bit. I think it's like we're more vulnerable in those moments sometimes.
well, it caught me
Maybe women.
at all feeling it or expecting it until she just came over and barely touched me. So anyway, yeah. So that was my most recent.
I got overwhelmed today. I have this big bottle of Castile soap, and I was trying to pour the soap into the soap dispenser, and I couldn't do it. And I went and I got a funnel, and then it wasn't draining fast enough. And it really, really just overwhelmed me. And I literally screamed. I'm not kidding you. I screamed like a child, like, ah, like just screamed. And I thought to myself, wow, you are quite overwhelmed. Good Lord, over soap. Soap.
I get
Yeah,
that way.
it was-
When Brooke is not here, I tend to yell and curse a lot. And it's free real estate for me to just lose my mind.
And the
When
cats
I am here, he does it too, and I will just leave the room.
Well,
and
no,
I'll be like,
I'm
"Come
like
back
when
this
you're
energy is
here,
clear."
when you're here, I'm muttering under my breath and like cursing quietly. But I'm gonna make an argument that what we've all shared is maybe a lighter feeling of overwhelmed. It's maybe closer to whelmed than overwhelmed. When I think of overwhelmed, I think of like the pressure builds up and something breaks. Some system or process or
Google.
something that we do inside of us just absolutely does not work anymore and it's just cannot be fixed. So for example, like maybe like a past relationship. Maybe Lisa, you've probably seen this in your practice before, couples. Sometimes people just get so overwhelmed it's time for the relationship to be destroyed.
I've been there.
Sometimes, I mean, we've been there, Brooke, where we felt overwhelmed. Me, Brooke, and Jerome felt overwhelmed with cutting marketing, and we're like, "This is not working."
I don't think it has to break necessarily, but maybe change.
Break is a strong word, but it's just something's got to change. Something has to be different, and you cannot continue with the way things are going. With what we've described, maybe there's like moments of like, okay, like we're being a little emotionally overwhelmed, but we're able to go through it. And Lisa, I imagine you still continue to go yoga. Is that correct?
Yes.
Brooke, we've moved into the house, so that's obviously there. Jen, were you able to get the soap in the container?
Yes.
So we all made it through whatever thing
We all survived.
was whelming us. But there are moments though when like you don't survive or whatever's been going on just completely breaks down.
So the difference between like being stressed and like just completely saying hands off, I'm not doing this anymore because I can't.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Like I think the easiest example for people would just be like you get so overwhelmed at a job, you just quit on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
It's not worth a second more of your time or energy.
I don't think you necessarily have to quit, but there are other I think we're being very specific. Like I think we need to caution ourselves and be less specific with the results because I think overwhelm can be subtler too.
Yeah.
I don't think it always shows up in like some earth-shattering, life-changing event. And I think that the reason I caution that is because I think there can be like an overwhelm creep that can happen with people where this is something that I identify in me. I used to have bigger overwhelm. When I had PTSD, when I was still struggling with a lot of emotional stuff, and I didn't know what emotions were happening, I would, get triggered and crazy, have these overwhelming emotional reactions and almost not be able to function for a while, and then come out of it, feel really silly and all of this. And that was a big working process to get through that. And yeah, and a lot of that, there are a lot of things you can't do for a while until you start to work through those issues and find your way to the other side. But there is also like subtler overwhelm creep.
But
I think
isn't that the whelmed that we talked into that you're describing as it built? It became the overwhelmed, but the creep was the whelmed.
I think it can show up though, like in I think a big way it shows up is in avoidance. I think that we can have something we're avoiding because we're overwhelmed by it, right? And we keep avoiding it, and avoiding it causes other things, and it starts to be like a snowball, where it gets bigger and bigger, and it ends up having some kind of gravitational pull to it and becoming a bigger problem, and a bigger problem, and a bigger problem, and a bigger problem. And so it starts out subtler, like I'm avoiding this because it's overwhelming. I don't want to sort through it. I don't want to deal with it right now, whatever reason you have going on. But then avoiding it and pushing it off is causing it to sort of grow. And then that's eventually we get to this point where it can be very big and catastrophic. However, I do think that there is a lot of ways to catch it, stop it, arrest that process before a catastrophe or a major change is required. I think maybe that would be an art, being able to identify, the things you are overwhelmed by earlier so that they don't become a big problem later.
Is that something a coach could help with?
I would hope so. Yeah, I really would.
Well,
I mean, this is becoming, I think it's identifying patterns, right?
Yeah,
this becomes
exactly.
a thing where
this is a pattern in someone's life.
Yeah, we as coaches will start to be able to identify patterns in our clients and patterns in their behavior and the patterns that lead to overwhelm.
So then would it be appropriate for a coach in a session to be like, Brooke, it sounds like you're avoiding this. Or maybe framing it as a question instead. Brooke, are you avoiding this?
Very good at
avoiding.
I don't know. I don't know that I would just now go there, and I might ask, and describe back what she shared, and have her come up with what word works for her. Right? Because the labeling might not work. It might be true for Brooke, but it might not be true for Jen.
Could you say though, like, to me as a coach, it sounds like you're avoiding this. Is that a true way of looking at it, or is there something else going on that I'm not seeing?
You can deliver a direct observation of what it seems like to you and then ask the client what they think. Absolutely. I would do it.
Is that ACC or PCC level coaching?
PCC. You can in ACC.
That's why I don't know.
In ACC, you have to ask. In ACC, you have to ask permission. In PCC, there's less of the need to ask for permission. Essentially,
for MCC, you just go for it.
Like in ACC, you would say, "May I please make an observation?" In PCC, you said, "I'm going to make an observation. Tell me." And
or
in MCC, you just say, "You are."
Yeah. The way you framed it, though, Anthony, is perfect. To me, it seems like avoidance. What do you think about that? Right now, you've given it away. You're not claiming it as truth.
And I'm willing to be swayed one way or another, but I want to hear.
You're not attached,
right?
I'm not attached.
I have asked clients, and when they're in that state, they get irritated. Just what do you think? I go, I don't know that I'm right. It's possible that I'm noticing avoidance. How does that resonate with you? So depending on who your client is, that can work. Any and all of these can work.
Misha would tell me if I asked the way you asked that I needed to be more direct. Because I get in trouble for asking permission. That is like the biggest mentoring thing I got.
It can seem at a point that maybe you're dancing around what you really are wanting to say if you keep on asking permission over and over again. So there might be a healthy balance in between just blasting them with an opinion.
Once a session, maybe twice a session. But outside of that, though, I want to give to Jen's credit. I did say avoidance, and she did give me back the same language, right? When she said that. So like she did give me back my language when I said avoidance. And avoidance is one example. When we're talking about noticing patterns that result in overwhelm, it may not be avoidance that it shows up. It's avoidance with me because I lack executive function. So like that's part of having ADHD. I just don't have executive function. So I avoid anything that isn't going to give me happy brain chemicals, essentially. So I'm very good at avoiding things. Unless I find a way to like make it, there's other tricks that we have to take, but there are other ways that it can show up. It's not just going to be in avoidance. There are other ways to say avoidance too, right? There absolutely are.
Putting it off or procrastinating. I think we touched on the other ways, which is like emotional outburst, which is like just opening the stress valve real quick. So if like your client is just like wanting to dump, they're just like, I don't want to think, I don't want to plan, I just want to get it out of me and want to rant a little bit. And maybe it's like a productive rant. Maybe they're like, I'm going to rant for 5 minutes. And then once I'm done with the rant, I'll sort of reflect.
I'll be able to process and move forward.
Or maybe
they just entire channel in our Slack for myself and Lisa and Jen for just that reason.
Productive ranting.
Boy, howdy, do we use it?
Why can't me and Jerome
the emotions out, and once they're out, we can be sensible and realistic human beings. But first, we have to get through this first part.
You guys can't be in it because half the time we're just ranting about you.
Oh, sorry, Jerome.
We've got one about you guys too.
That is
okay.
Just kidding. We rant about everything.
Yes,
good idea. Maybe I'll make our own secret channel for just the fellas.
It's not secret.
Where we know the three of us can just be just girls, emotional. Especially an emotional.
I didn't say it, but sure.
So, but as we're like, one of the things we'd mentioned though is bringing it up. I think it's important to note if we're acknowledging patterns, it might not be just saying, does this feel like avoidance? It might be what is similar about this, about what is going on from what we worked on last week. You know what I mean? That might be how we start to get them to identify patterns. They're finding themselves into these spaces where they're moving towards overwhelm. We're going to ask that question. So what is happening that is similar? Instead of saying, it sounds like you're avoiding again, we can say, what is similar in this situation and in this situation? We've worked on both. Tell me what is happening. What is going on that is the same in both? And that is an opportunity for the client to start to self-identify their own patterns. And so it may not be something that happens the first session with your client. It might be something that as you're working with them a little bit, we start to see the patterns, and then we're going to reflect back on whatever they're working on currently and ask them to identify those patterns themselves.
Sure. That's definitely an option.
I think about a client I had not too long ago, and it was funny, and she was definitely overwhelmed, and she was in a space of, my house is a disaster. It's an absolute mess. My office is a mess. I can barely walk through. I can barely get anything done, but I have to get all of this stuff done for work. Right? Like, and so I feel like I'm not allowed to clean and I'm not allowed to get this done, but then I can't focus and then I can't, to get the work done. And so she was just in this space where she was kind of stuck, right? Where it was like feeding itself, So the whole coaching session became around, okay, what can we do first? And what is most important? And then it was, well, I think it's cleaning. And then it was around, okay, so what has to happen for you to be okay with cleaning? And it was like literally going through like her having to rationalize that it was okay for her to clean up first. And that was also an important step in her working process to have a clean space. And she, the next week, came back and she's like, I cleaned. I'm so grateful. I feel so much better. I was able to be so much more productive. And I realized like I had to that I had to acknowledge that is part of my process. Having a clean space has to be part of my process. But for some, in her situation, she wasn't allowing, that felt selfish, and but it was actually an important part of her process. So that was an easier, more straightforward, but a way that overwhelm absolutely came up.
Sure.
For a client of mine. Just that popped into my head, thought I'd share. What next, guys? It was all quiet. Everybody looks like
I'm just trying to maybe go through how overwhelming can show up differently. Sometimes, at least for me, it's like defeatism or pessimism, where it's just like, I don't even want to begin. This is just a futile effort. I don't even want to start.
Wow, yeah.
Because I'm already overwhelmed from the beginning, and it's just not worth the effort. I don't want to bother with it, so you don't even get started with things. You
that
might know what
sad.
you want.
So
I'm going to give up before I even start.
What is your process that gets you out of that?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, self-loathing and hatred. No, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a situation where that has occurred recently.
I mean, I can absolutely see that. I've known artists, people who want to be artists, that will be like, well, I don't even know. Everybody's done it before. I don't even know, and they're in these states of just sort of like giving up before they even begin.
Yeah.
Failing yourself so no one else can.
Maybe for me, it was like writing. Like, I want to write creatively, but I get so overwhelmed with the idea of like, it's all the other crap that is aside from writing. Even though I don't know if I'm really that great of a writer, it's everything else that is around writing, which is like publishing and having to like market yourself, and potentially you need to be an influencer to even get any traction in traditional publishing. And if you don't want to go traditional publishing, then you got to think about self-publishing. That's the whole mess. And all of that gets so overwhelming that like you don't even want to start, because what's the point?
I've also noticed another way that you get overwhelmed with, like when it comes to writing too, like you will overwhelm yourself, is like you'll get so lost in like a concept, and the concept having to be something and done in such a structure and done in such a way that it will be successful. And when in the back of my mind, and I've never said this out loud though, just write, man. Like, let it go. Just effing put the pen to paper, put the fingers on the keyboard, and just write. Like, don't get lost in all of this. Like, it needs to be X, Y, or Z perfection, what have you, and let it be crappy, but write.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what has now happened. That's how I got out of it, was that I started going back to school so I could finish my degree and taking the writing classes. So now I just have to do it.
You have to, right? So you can't get stuck in all that minutiae.
Which I don't know that
solves. You have to be forced into it.
I think I'm misattributing what is solving the problem, though, because I could easily see a situation where it's just like you get overwhelmed and you just fail class. You don't do the writing anyways. So
you do that.
Maybe
you would not do that.
But I think it's maybe just lessening the stakes a little bit has been useful, because it's just students and it's just my peers who may or may not be great writers, and it's just my teacher, and it's not I'm not trying to sell it to an audience. I'm not trying to be a literary genius. I'm just trying to do the assignment that is in front of me, and that I can handle, and then just put words to the keyboard and then edit as I go. Not saying I'm happy with the results, but I don't feel overwhelmed. I can do it like any other task at work. It just fits into my day. Now, there could be a situation where like work gets really busy and maybe I have other things that are going on outside of work, and then maybe I get overwhelmed, but that's like a time issue now. That's not really an overwhelmed by like being defeatist and pessimistic. I talked about myself a lot, but how do we as coaches bridge that gap for our clients who are feeling a little bit defeatist before they even begin?
Well, I think you kind of brought it up there too. And that's to like essentially help them to
Lower the stakes.
adjust the focus, right? Like maybe they're focusing on this giant goal that seems unattainable. So how do we bring it down into a space that feels more realistic and attainable for them, right? So that they're able to start working and get out of that and give up space.
So I have a visual that goes with that. It's a ladder that has the rungs really far, and then another ladder that has several rungs in those places. So you can either do the smaller steps to get there, or you can do, get that overwhelmed feeling possibly to get that first level going and then get that next level going. But at times when you take the bite-sized steps or the smaller steps, you can then move into the greater expansion versus the smaller expansion moments. So, and both of you, all of you have just really discussed in the coaching practice, whether you were talking about yourself, Anthony, or you were talking about the person you were coaching, Brooke, you both shared that this big picture, or this big step, became manageable by adding the smaller steps towards that goal.
I think it's also focusing in too. I think another important part of it is like, is bringing it to this, like, what is important for that client, right? Is what is important that they are writing and starting to write and be a writer if they're not writing and they want to be a writer, or is what is important being published? You know what I mean? And like starting to define, or does being published only make you a writer when are you only a writer when you're published? Like starting to ask around, being curious in those spaces so that client can start to define for themselves and attach some emotional relevance and reasoning behind what they are doing, and then adjust the focus to something that is more bite-sized and manageable for them. I think all the time with clients who are working out, I think the ones that are most successful and most consistent are the ones who come in without these big grand, I'm going to lose 20 pounds in 2 months, and then those people end up burning out really fast. But the ones who just say, I want to do this for me, I want to be healthy and I want to be consistent, those are the ones who stick around. Like they're not, it's much more manageable structure for them, essentially.
Yeah, so it's like almost about, it sounds like, simplifying the way that you're thinking about it versus this big, you were like with Anthony, like it had so much more meaning, and then it was like we reduced and simplified the meaning down to like, I just need to do it. I just need to get it done. How do I need to think about it in order to actually take action on it? And it's similar, it sounds like, too, to what you're saying, Brooke, is like, okay, at the end of the day, having this big grandiose idea of the exact results that I'm going to get from just moving my body every day is not helping me to take that step every day. So it's like simplifying the way the client is thinking about it to where they can take the next step. That's what it sounds like.
I mean, I even do this with the simpler projects too. Like if I need to write like 2,000 words, that's a lot of words. But if I think, okay, I just need 4 sections that are 500 word chunks. Okay, now it's a little bit more manageable.
Right.
Or I could do 8 chunks that are 250 words, or 16 chunks that are 125 words.
And that's one of those
spaces. Chunks that are, no, I'm still going. No.
Where I might ask my client if they're at 0 words.
Right.
Well, what is better? 50 words or 0 words for you? Like what's better? And they might tell me, Well, 50 might as well be 0. Okay, fine. What's the first mark that isn't that is of value? What is that first point? When is it? Like, what is that marker for you? And then they'll tell you what it is, and I'll say, okay,
maybe
how do we get that done?
In more abstract terms, what is the smallest action you can take that will have a measurable difference?
Yeah.
And I think it's important. I'm thinking of another client I had that had set a goal and like had a plan of like gamifying it, and doing all these things, and then just wasn't doing it, right? It wasn't like, I'm just not. It's still kind of frozen. And was at the same time like beating themselves up for not doing it. Like, you know what I mean? And it became, for that overwhelm, it became about them giving them permission not to be perfect at it. Like it's a sort of a perfectionist quality or trait where it's like, if I can't do it perfect the first time, I'm not going to do it. So in that case, it became that form of overwhelm. There's like perfection's a lot. That's very overwhelming. That's why, I mean, there's the phrase progress, not perfection. That's kind of what we're talking about here, right? So in that instance, it became around like, okay, how like if it is twice a week walking better than 0,
Right.
And again, very similar situation where you're giving them permission not to be perfect, and to also it's for that client, it was one step further. It was giving them permission to also be proud of themselves for the little bit that they did, because they had been holding themselves to this higher standard. It has to be perfect. They weren't at all acknowledging the little progress they had made, the small steps they had already taken. And they were so stuck in this negative internal dialogue cycle of, I'm not, good enough. I'm not perfect. I'm not doing it right. I'm not doing that. They were not allowing themselves to even acknowledge the small amount of progress they had made. And they had made small progress. So in that session, it became me sort of assisting them in identifying that, no, I have actually done something, and I'm allowed to be proud of myself. And then it actually ended up going from there in asking into why that negative internal dialogue is present and what it's doing for them and how it's serving them. So, yeah. Which is kind of what that self-defeatist, right? They, again, that person felt like the self-defeatist was their motivator, was the thing that motivated them to get stuff done. We found out in this session, though, that actually that internal dialogue was not nearly as productive as they were giving it credit for.
Yeah, right.
And in fact, it was serving as a tool to let them just blow things off, ultimately.
Oh, that's interesting. And all that was uncovered in the session.
Yeah, absolutely it was.
Which then gives them really valuable data to go from.
And change the just the way that they're thinking and approaching. And they absolutely did, and saw changes as a result of that.
Well, and create a boundary for themselves for when they don't want to do something. They have the opportunity now to just be truthful to themselves versus tell themselves a story.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe to wrap up the conversation, since we're getting close to the time now, what about when we can't help them as a coach, when someone's feeling overwhelmed? Where do we draw the line?
Well, I think that there's a good example that I brought up. Although coaching did help me, but I also did therapy in tandem with it. So let me be very clear about that. But I was doing both simultaneously. But in the case of my case, where I had PTSD and I had genuine trauma things that were coming up, and I was ending up in spaces, and it was making me emotional, where I was reliving past traumas and reliving them in a way that was just not, that I didn't want. And so at that point, I was thinking I was just going to do coaching, but I had a realization that I needed to do both. And I was like, I have to do therapy so I can talk through the past trauma stuff and process that. And I'll keep doing some coaching too, but I really, in this moment, needed some therapy because I had to talk through that past trauma before I could fully coach forward in the ways I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just absolutely happened for me.
So how would the coach identify that if maybe the client hasn't gone to therapy?
The client didn't know better, right? Because I knew better at that point.
So Brooke mentioned like sobbing, like not crying, not just a release of energy, if you will, but somebody who's sobbing, who keeps revisiting the experience. It's impacting their today's world in a traumatic way.
Yes, I mean, I feel like we can have, that's a big thing, and I know Jen took a whole course on this on trauma informed coaching. But when it comes to trauma, there's a fine line between knowing, there's always something there a little bit, but when you are actively reliving that trauma over and over, and it is actively affecting your life, and for me, it was causing like full flashback PTSD symptoms, right? Where I would get into fight or flight. I would barricade myself in rooms. I would just have these severe emotional reactions where I felt like I was under attack again, essentially. And it just, for me, it's very obvious, like the coaches, that's not their space to be helping in. So if you have a client that is sharing that kind of information with you, they may not be having that in the session with you, but they might share that they're having those kind of episodes. I would at that point then refer out for sure. Say, hey, I think you need some therapy, friend. Probably not like that.
I've had clients share some very, very, very emotional, traumatic events that happened and has never received any kind of therapy around. That becomes an important place for them to launch into that space so that they can get whatever help they need in the moment. That doesn't mean I can't coach and stay in my coaching realm, not on that topic necessarily.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if the client is not able to shift, if they are always in what's called hyper arousal, or they're always in hypo arousal, so basically what you're hearing, either heightened or reduced, their nervous system is never regulating. They're always in one of the other states when they come to you. That's an indication that that coaching is not the appropriate modality. And that's when that should be mentioned.
And it can look like disassociation too. Like it can look like disassociation. Like that's the hypo typically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's something to definitely be aware of, you know. It's
For
part of
sure.
our ethical duties is to be paying attention to that type of thing.
When I was a beginning coach, I mean, in my first class of coaching, I was totally overwhelmed and totally worried about, will I recognize this? And it so changed who I was in coaching. Finally, somebody came up to me and said, who is this person? I like this person when we're off the clock, but when we're on the clock, I don't know who that is. So I think a lot of new coaches get into the worrisome space. Can they recognize those? They don't want to hurt others. Oh, I got to sneeze. And I don't want to do harm, right? They're very worried that I don't want to do harm. But if you keep those things in mind that we've mentioned, especially Brooke and Jen just now, that's a really good basis to consider referring out for your client to go find the appropriate help they need.
Yeah.
And I think if you have training and you're doing it, and you have early on, maybe you're extra cautious, right? You're extra super duper cautious.
Sure.
And I think the more you coach, the more you'll be able to recognize the subtleties, and that comfort will grow and the knowledge will grow. But if that's, and it should be. So early on, better safe than sorry, essentially. Mm-hmm. So
absolutely
hyper vigilant at first, and then you'll start to figure out as you do that what those spaces look like. And the more you practice, the more you keep learning and talking to other coaches and have a system of checks and balances, the more comfortable you're going to be in identifying that.
Mm-hmm.
I have to hop off. Bye, guys.
Okay.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.
I think that's a pretty good way to capstone the live. And if you're watching this and you feel overwhelmed, maybe in your career choices, take coaching 101 and 102. You'll leave class feeling whelmed, just whelmed, and you'll have a good idea of what you need to do next. You won't feel overwhelmed. You won't feel like you don't know what you ought to be doing.
Right.
Yep. Anthony isn't lying. As a participant who's taken class, obviously with CLCI, and as someone who's not actively coaching, it's still a great space to go ahead and kind of reduce some of that overwhelm that you might have in life. You figure out a lot of things about yourself, and it really helps you out just in general. So if you're not looking to become a coach and you just want to help with some overwhelm, check us out.
You get like what is it? Like how many actual coaching sessions happen in the breakouts?
Oh gosh,
like 3 a day, 4 days,
3, 6. Yeah, about 6 a day.
They vary with time too.
Yeah,
you get about.
I'm just gonna go out there and say it officially. You're essentially paying for 18 coaching sessions across 3 days.
There you go.
But actually, just take it for the certification. That's why you take it. It's for the certification, and you don't feel overwhelmed when you are starting your business as a life coach.
Yep.
With that, be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment, and we will see you guys next week. I don't know if we're continuing Clients 101.
Okay.
We might have a new subject for March.
Oh, right, because it's a new month.
But, there's so many different types of clients we might continue doing. But for now, we will see you guys next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
See you guys.